Hello, biology students. This is our first section of a really cool chapter on energy. It's a continuation of our energy topic. And when we were talking about enzymes, you learned that energy is the ability to do work. And we said that enzymes are biological catalysts that come together to speed up chemical reactions. And this is our first biochemical pathway that we are going to look at. So if you break it down, biochemical, you're thinking bio-life, chemical chemistry, and then a pathway is a series of chemical reactions that are going to occur within an organism to get to that end product. And ultimately in cellular respiration, that end product that we are looking for is indeed energy, the currency molecule, energy currency molecule of living things, which is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So as we go through the chapter, you'll learn about this very important biochemical pathway that is essential to all living things because it produces ATP and it produces some byproducts as well. So let's take a look at section 9.1, which talks about the chemical pathways. We know that food serves as a source of raw materials for cells in the body and as a source of energy. So as we take in those food molecules, whether it be a plant or another animal, we begin the process of digestion where we start breaking that food down to get the nutrients we need and also to get energy out of the food. And we know that basically when we talked about all living things require energy, we said that there are those organisms that are photoautotrophic or autotrophic in general, or you could be chemoautotrophic, which would be another type of autotroph, or you could be an organism like animals, and we are considered heterotrophs, which means we obtain our energy by consuming other organisms. And when we consume those organisms, it could be a plant, or it could be another animal, or it could just be one specifically. So you could be labeled as a heterotroph or consumer. There are those that are herbivores, omnivores, or carnivores. An omnivore eats both plants and animals, and then a carnivore would eat just meat, and an herbivore would eat just plants. So in our next chapter, we're going to go back to chapter 8, study photosynthesis. We'll talk about how that all takes place. But in this chapter, we are going to focus specifically on breaking down that food energy into our cellular energy, ATP. So both plants and animals carry out the final stages of cell respiration in an organelle called the mitochondria. And we looked at the mitochondria before. This is different from photosynthesis. Photosynthesis takes place in the chloroplast. And of course, you know that photosynthesis only occurs in plants that are green. Well, plants that are green also carry out cellular respiration. So this occurs in both plants and animals and other organisms as well. If you look, there is the structure of the mitochondria. Both plant and animal cells have mitochondria, and you can see here is an electron micrograph of what a mitochondria will look like. And basically here is where you have the cartoon structure of the mitochondria. The mitochondria was once thought to be a living organism itself, and through time it has evolved and became part of the eukaryotic cell. It does have an outer membrane and an inner membrane, and then the space that is between the outer membrane and the inner membrane there is called the intermembrane space. And that's important because you'll hear something about the intermembrane space as we get more in depth in the chemical reactions. And then the inner membrane is folded, and those folds in the inner membrane are called cristae. And we'll talk about that a little later. But basically, when you have folds like that, just like in your intestine, those folds are going to increase the surface area for a reaction to occur. And then inside the inner membrane, you have all the other material there, and that other material is called the mitochondrial matrix. So we'll look at these different parts of the mitochondria and see which reactions specifically occur in each of those little compartments of that organelle. So basically we know that chemical energy and food, there is a relationship there. And we've learned that when we talked about chemical energy and food, in our lab, we discussed calories, and we did our food calorimetry lab. And basically what we saw was that a calorie is 1 gram of a substance that, when burned in the presence of oxygen, will change the temperature of 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. So it's the amount of energy required to change 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. So in this case, we're looking at sugar, and specifically we're looking at the sugar glucose. And you call that glucose is our blood sugar from biochemistry. Its chemical formula is C6H12O6. It is a 6-carbon hexose sugar that is an isomer of both fructose and galactose. So we know that 1 gram of glucose, C6H12O6, when burned in the presence of oxygen, will release about 3,811 calories of heat energy. And the calorie itself is the amount of energy that is needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius. And we did that when we did our food energy lab in class. So basically, what is the relationship between food, energy, calories, and how does it play a role in cell respiration? Well, if we take a look here, we know that there are several reactions that occur in the process of cellular respiration. Basically, glucose is going to enter into the cell, and the first step is a process called glycolysis. And in glycolysis, which takes place in the cytoplasm of the cell, you're going to take that initial glucose molecule and break it down into a product called pyruvic acid. And out of that step, we're going to get some energy, and we're going to get an electron carrier. In this case, it's NADH. And then what will happen is pyruvic acid will enter into the mitochondria if oxygen is available. And it will enter into a process called the Krebs cycle. So that's our second reaction. And in the Krebs cycle, or also known as the citric acid cycle, you are going to get out a little bit of energy, and you're going to get out more electron carrier molecules called NADH and FADH2. And basically those electron carrier molecules that were produced in the first step of glycolysis and produced in the second step of the Krebs cycle are going to now enter into a third phase of cell respiration called the electron transport chain. And the electron transport chain, or commonly called the ETS, electron transport system, is going to use the energy from those electrons out of the electron carrier molecules, NADH and FADH2, to produce more energy. Energy, of course, in the form of ATP. So these last two steps occur in the mitochondria after glycolysis, which takes place in the cytoplasm. But this entire process depends on oxygen, and you'll learn why oxygen is required in order for true cellular respiration to take place. So here you can see it. Glycolysis will come through. You get out a little bit of ATP. You do get out a little bit of ATP from the Krebs cycle, but the bulk of your ATP production is going to come out of the electron transport chain. So defining cell respiration, cellular respiration is the process that releases energy by breaking down glucose and other food molecules in the presence of oxygen. The equation for cellular respiration is the reverse of that of photosynthesis. So the products of photosynthesis are now the reactants of cellular respiration. And what we have here is 6O2 plus a glucose molecule, C6H12O6, and that's going to yield carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of CO2, water, 6 molecules of water, and energy in the form of ATP. Glycolysis does take place in the cytoplasm, and the Krebs cycle and electron transport chain take place in the mitochondria. So glycolysis occurs whether oxygen will be available or not. If oxygen is available after glycolysis, then the process will continue inside the mitochondria where we have the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. This is true aerobic respiration. So what happens during the process of glycolysis? In glycolysis, at the beginning, you're going to have ATP production. So at the beginning of glycolysis, the cell is going to use up 2 molecules of ATP to get the reaction going. And glucose will be converted. So there's your 2 ATP that are coming in. And remember, ATP, when it releases that third phosphate group, becomes adenosine diphosphate. And we got an intermediate molecule there. And basically what will happen then is we get 4 ADP molecules that will come in to produce 4 ATP molecules. And we end up at the end with 2 pyruvic acid. So we are going from glucose, 1 molecule, which is 6 carbons, to 2 pyruvic acid. And each of those pyruvic acid molecules have 3 carbons. The initial step of glycolysis does require an input of energy to get the reaction going, but the output of ATP in the second part of the reaction, you get 4. So when glycolysis is complete, 4 ATP molecules have been produced, which gives the cell a net gain of 2 ATP molecules, because you have 2 in initially and you get 4 out at the end. So that would be a net gain of 2. 4 minus 2 equals 2. And there you see it. You also do have NADH produced. One reaction of glycolysis will remove 4 high energy electrons and pass them to an electron carrier called NAD+. Each NAD+ is going to accept a pair of high energy electrons to become the energy-rich electron carrier molecule known as NADH. And you can see that in the second step there. 2 NAD+ molecules are going to come in and pick up 2 NADH, or pick up 2 high energy electron molecules to form 2 NADH molecules. So you also get a net gain of 2 NADH molecules out of glycolysis. The NADH molecule holds the electrons until they can be transferred to other molecules. They will be used in the electron transport chain. The advantage of glycolysis. The advantages of glycolysis basically is that the process of glycolysis is so fast that cells can produce thousands of ATP molecules in a few milliseconds. Glycolysis occurs whether oxygen is available or not. So whether you're talking about anaerobic respiration without oxygen or aerobic respiration with oxygen, glycolysis takes place in either one. But after glycolysis, if oxygen is not available or not present, then you have a process called anaerobic. Anaerobic respiration is also known as fermentation. So when oxygen is not present, glycolysis is followed by a different pathway, and the combined process of this pathway and glycolysis is referred to as fermentation. Fermentation is going to release energy from food molecules by producing ATP in the absence of oxygen. During fermentation, the cells are going to convert NADH. Remember, NADH is that high energy electron carrier molecule. It's going to convert it back to NAD+ when those electrons aren't present in the molecule by passing high energy electrons back to the pyruvic acid molecule. And pyruvic acid, if you recall, is the end product of glycolysis. And this action converts NADH back into NAD plus and allows glycolysis to continue producing a steady supply of ATP. If you fail to convert NADH back into NAD plus, that whole entire process of glycolysis will come to a halt because there are no electron carrier molecules to come in and pick up those electrons. Fermentation does not require oxygen, therefore it is considered an anaerobic process. Anaerobic lacks oxygen, aerobic requires oxygen. So what are the two basic types of fermentation? The first one would be a process called alcoholic fermentation. Alcoholic fermentation occurs in yeast, and a few other microorganisms use alcoholic fermentation. And the end product of alcoholic fermentation is, after glycolysis, pyruvate is going to be converted to ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide as waste. The equation for alcoholic fermentation after glycolysis is pyruvic acid, which came from glycolysis, plus NADH yields alcohol, ethanol specifically, plus CO2 plus NAD+. The other type of fermentation is lactic acid fermentation. In many cells, pyruvic acid accumulates as a result of glycolysis, and that can be converted to lactic acid. This type of fermentation, called lactic acid fermentation, also regenerates that NAD plus molecule in order for glycolysis to occur or to continue in the cells. The equation for lactic acid fermentation after glycolysis includes pyruvic acid, NADH, yields lactic acid plus NAD+. Now, lactic acid fermentation does occur in our cells. It also occurs in some other small microorganisms as well. So basically, pyruvic acid, after glycolysis, pyruvic acid and NADH will get converted to lactic acid. That lactic acid buildup, if we go back there, that lactic acid buildup is when, during a strenuous exercise, you get that burning sensation in your muscles. That is lactic acid fermentation that's taking place because you're using up oxygen more rapidly than it could be replenished. What will happen then is that lactic acid will go to the liver, where it's reconverted back into pyruvate. So the first part of the equation of glycolysis is seen here. Glycolysis, you have glucose taking place, coming into the cell in the cytoplasm, 2 ATP and 2 NADH come out, and you get 2 pyruvic acid. In lactic acid fermentation, that pyruvic acid is going to be converted to lactic acid. You get 2 molecules of lactic acid. So 2 NADH molecules get converted to 2 NAD+, and then it comes back, and here it could come back in to pick up those electrons. Now, this is a very simplified overview of this chemical reaction. We will go over these again in class. I will draw them out on the board for you so you can get a better understanding of what is taking place. And basically, all of these steps do occur in the cytoplasm of the cell. If this were to be alcoholic fermentation, pyruvic acid will come over here, and you have as an end product 2 alcohol molecules, ethanol specifically, plus CO2 plus NADH molecules. So you get 2 carbon dioxide molecules and 2 NAD plus molecules as well. So this is an overview of section 9.1. We will discuss it a little further in class, and then we'll move forward with section 9.2, which is the process that's very essential to us. That's true aerobic respiration, cellular respiration, and that occurs in the mitochondria. Thank you and have a nice day.